Welcome, everybody. Welcome the folks in the room, and for those that are in the room that don't know, we have people outside of the room. So we're doing a little live stream and in person at the same time. So it should be interesting how that works out. So those that don't know, I'm David Hawks. I'm going to take this off now that we're done mingling, but I'm David Hawks with Agile Velocity, and today what we'd like to kind of walk you through is this notion of, I think, we're all familiar with Agile, but I think there's a lot of Agile going wrong in the world, and I think it's because they have a lot of companies are focusing on the wrong thing. They're focusing on the wrong, what is the goal, right? The goal is to implement Agile, or the goal is to do all the things in the picture. And what we're going to focus on today is what are we really trying to achieve from a business outcomes perspective? And that's what we're going to walk through. And in a second, we'll kind of ask you some questions, and we'll get the live stream folks engaged as well. All right, so here's a problem. I've been doing a survey at all the talks that I've been doing for the last 2 years. And that survey has been asking companies and the audience, like, what is your state of agility? And so what do you think folks are responding with? You think it's everything's really good? Everybody's state of agility is really good? No, we're seeing quite the opposite, that most organizations, almost 30%, are categorizing how I described superficial agility. Superficial agility I've described as it's like putting Agile lipstick on a waterfall pig, right? We're going through the motions, but we're not really that much, not working with more agility than we were before. We're still doing a lot of waterfall planning. We're very project focused. We're still assigning people based on projects, disbanding teams after projects are over. Teams are doing daily scrums, and they're maybe doing something that looks like sprint planning, but they're carrying over work every sprint, right? They're not actually getting things done. And so it's just kind of a superficial level. Improving, I described as like we're trying to get better. We have meaningful retrospectives. We have people playing the roles, and we're actively trying to get better. But look, we got almost half are kind of stuck in improving, right? Like they haven't gotten out of improving. And here we are, almost 20 years after the manifesto's been signed, and we got 50% of organizations are still improving agility. And haven't achieved what I describe as kind of more predictable or fast, right? And predictable, not that like we know exactly what we're going to deliver, but that we have a predictable cadence. We're getting things done every 2 weeks. We're swarming on work. We have team ownership. And then fast agility would be like we're continuously delivering functionality. So we've got lots of organizations that are struggling to get to the other side, if you will. And I think a lot of that is because, again, they had the wrong goal. The goal was, we're going to do Scrum. And so then they declared success because, all right, we had a daily Scrums, we had a sprint planning, we had a retrospective, we're going through all the motions, we're doing all those things. And so we did Scrum, but we haven't actually gotten predictable. And as you guys know, like this Agile stuff is simple but hard to master. Like, how do we actually get good at this work? So that's really where we're kind of coming from, is that we're seeing a lot of folks struggling to really achieve agility, right? Not just implementing the frameworks. We're too over ratcheted as a community on kind of implementing the frameworks, if you will. So what we want to do is a little bit of an activity. And I want to introduce you to kind of 9 business outcomes that we've identified from a Agile perspective. And on your tables, you've got 9 cards. And so for those on the live stream, you can kind of look at and just kind of associate and think about these cards that are here. But in kind of pairs, maybe work together. And I want you to take these 9, familiarize yourselves with them, and identify which ones do you think are the most important, or for your company would be the should have been maybe articulated as the drivers for agility. Why is your company doing this Agile stuff? It's going to help us how?
So these are the top three. 1, 2, 3.
You think you have your top ones? All right. Let's go ahead and debrief and discuss as a team. So what I want you to do is to text it or back to the poll. So whatever are the top 3 that you had for your organization, go ahead and select those on the poll. We'll see where we ended up. Apparently nobody wants to innovate. Yeah. So looks like speed might be our number 1. Why did y'all have, who in here in the room here had speed as one of their top ones? Yeah, so Marcus, why is speed important?
Well, I think no matter what you're doing, you want to figure out if it works.
Yeah.
And if it's something to discard and move on to the next.
So it's not, so it's speed and some notion of iterating, right? So like if we have speed, we can get smaller things out that we can test and validate before moving on to kind of the next thing. So there's some learning aspect to it, some validation. So early market validation could come into that. And here's where I think one of the big shifts we're trying to help IT enterprises with is the shift from being project focused to product focused. And when organizations are project focused, is there any encouragement when you have a big project and you have a budget that's assigned to it, it's funded? Is there much incentive for you to release that project early, right? Or is it like we've got one plan, we're executing the plan, we're going to deliver all the stuff at the end? And so when you think about it from a project perspective, it's really a moonshot, right? It's like one chance that we're going to make it and we're going to get everything in it. And there's not really an incentive for learning, because think about what learning would do. Like if we delivered a fifth of it and got it out there to learn, how do you think that would impact our project plan? It'd blow it up. Yeah, Paul's like, yeah, it would blow it up. So is it their incentive for the project manager to learn early? Because the project manager is accountable for what? Managing to this plan, managing the execution. And so I think the way that we fund most of our initiatives in a lot of IT enterprises is based on these projects. And when we think about it that way, we're not really encouraging this kind of ongoing investment in learning and cycle. So there's not even an encouragement to break it down into smaller deliverables to be able to do that. Pushing it from a product focus and an investment focus, then we start to think about things differently. Now it's all about earlier ROI. And what if we could take, and we had $1 million, year-long initiative, and what if we could do some things early in the first quarter and get it out the door that actually would generate value that might even pay for the fourth quarter, right? Like that's a whole different way of thinking about things. So speed, yeah, it's not just about deliver faster, be more responsive, as much as the learning component is also really critical. What about customer sat? Who had customer sat? Yeah. Why did you pick that, Steve?
I mean, there's really no point if your customers aren't satisfied with the product. If you put something out super fast, if the customers are happy with it, then what's the point? Like,
yeah. Yeah. So, and ultimately, we can look a little bit at, so did y'all start to get some sense of dependency across these things as you were discussing them and looking at them? And our ultimate deal is like customer sat. Everything kind of drives towards the value we're delivering. At the end of the day, are our customers happy? Are they buying more from us? Are we attracting more customers, retaining customers, all that kind of stuff? So customer sat could be the ultimate goal. But then when we talk about things like speed, well, we're doing that, and speed will help us be more responsive. That ultimately could lead to customer sat, right? And in terms of that, I think what's really important to think about when you're kind of thinking about agile transformation or change or agile adoption, transition, whatever word you want to use, is what is our ultimate goal, which might be we need happier customers, but also also thinking about what's our goal in the next 3 to 6 months. The things that we're going to implement in the next 3 to 6 months, are they going to directly, if we just put NPS score as our #1 objective, the first 3 to 6 months of a transformation, we might not make a huge impact to NPS. Or right, you're right. It might actually be negatively impacted in the investment to try and get to a positive impact. So what we got to think about also when we're shaping a change initiative is thinking about what are we ultimately trying to get to, but then also where are we going to get the first wins? Where's the initial focus? So things like employee engagement. Maybe are we going to be able to do all these things here if we don't have everybody on board, empowered, excited to be at work, high morale? If we've got a retention problem and we're making a bunch of investment in new processes and new skills, and we have a retention, then we're going to be constantly training new people all the time, right? So employee engagement becomes a really critical thing. Now, where did we have employee engagement? Oh, 4%. Oh, we need to work on that, right? Well, I'm sure all of your companies, everybody's really highly engaged and already has a great culture, so you don't need to invest there. But that's something to think about is this really something that we should be focused on? Maybe it's not the reason why we would do Agile, but if you think about today's job market, I know for those that are in the room, I mean, hiring developers is really easy right now, right? No, it's a real challenge. And so when we think about, we could do some of the things that we see, like, oh, we got a great workspace and we have food and we have this and we have that. But at the end of the day, what really matters is the work environment, and how are people enjoying how they're working, the way they're working, the work they're doing. Are we, so we got to think about, are we investing enough in that employee engagement as well? So then we hit on speed, we hit on customer sat, and then we've got kind of quality, predictability, market responsiveness, productivity, all kind of in that. The next, I like that it keeps moving a little bit. So there's again, back to this view here, we've got definitely some one dependency I want to call out is I think we've got to get to predictability before speed. And the reason why I say that is because if you've got a lot of volatility, right, lots of interruptions all the time, your system is really complex, not the technical system, but the system in which we work. If there's a lot of complexity in that and a lot of volatility, then it's hard to optimize for flow. And so I believe that we've got to get predictable before we can start tuning the engine to go faster. And again, when I say predictability, I'm not talking about we know exactly what we'll deliver 6 months from now, but that we have a predictable cadence of delivery. We have a team that can crank out 5 things every 2 weeks. Whatever 5 things we give them, they can crank out. Once we get the volatility out, then we can start optimizing. And so I hear speed is usually the #1, and it was here today as well. So speed is always something we hear from at all levels, from executives all the way down. We want to deliver things faster. We want to get, and then maybe the productivity side of it, like we want to get more done faster, right? And so yeah, that's great. But if we don't have our employees engaged, if we're not getting very predictable, then we're going to have a hard time optimizing for speed. If we have a lot of quality issues, we're going to have a hard time optimizing for speed. So when you think about it for your organization, I want you to think about, are we prioritizing, it's kind of like what's the foundational stuff we need to do now, and what's the aspirational stuff that we hope to achieve, over time. All right, now one thing that we think about is how do these business outcomes kind of drive, if we've got business outcomes on one side of this, on the other side we've got the practices, we still have to change some process, change how we work, right? The systems in which we kind of define our processes drive there's certain experiences that happen, right? And ultimately that's going to drive a change in our actions, right? And so what we want to think about is we don't want to just start practices first. Again, that's where I think many organizations are getting it wrong, because we just say the goal might even be, the goal of the transformation is to implement SAFe, or the goal is to implement Scrum, or the goal is to implement Less, or Scrum at Scale, or pick your favorite framework. And what we think about is not just what is the practices and the process elements, but what are we trying to do from a business outcomes? And so we think the business outcomes should drive us figuring out, okay, what are the agile outcomes and capabilities that we're trying to develop within the organization? So it's not about Scrum, but it's about that we can plan iteratively, right? The outcome from an agility perspective is that our teams are focused and getting stuff done, that our teams are shortening their cycle time, right? That's the agile outcome that we're trying to achieve. And we need to think about, from the business outcomes you just chose, what would be the things that we're trying to develop as capabilities within our organization, and that ultimately helps us drive what practices and helps us identify what practices should we be doing. So instead of starting solution first, right, which is what a lot of us do, we should be starting with outcomes and then figuring out what solutions will solve that, right? Because then that's going to help enable and drive and accomplish the outcomes that we had. And we need to be clear about, on these business outcomes, how are we going to measure success, right? So turning into metrics. So for speed, maybe cycle time is a really important measure for us to look at. And how long does it take for us to get things out? Looking at lead time, looking at cycle time, looking at all those different elements. If customer sat is the goal, how are we going to measure customer sat? We could do some things around NPS, but it also could be looking at retention and some other metrics. Are we attracting more customers? And depending on your product and your market, you may be able to measure different things. Employee engagement, right? Do you have like an employee engagement survey that goes out every quarter? Are we measuring that? Are we looking at that? Or is it our employee retention and turnover? Those are metrics we're potentially looking at. So what are the things that we're trying to drive? Then we want to figure out what outcomes and capabilities from an agility perspective that we want to enable and unlock within our organization. And then lastly, figure out what practices could help with that. Because otherwise how are we going to measure that we're doing the practice as well? Without this lens, what has happened when an organization implements Scrum? So how many people in here, this company is doing, teams are doing Scrum? Pretty much, yeah, everybody's doing Scrum. How do you think your organization has decided that we're doing Scrum well enough? Or if you were not at your organization, how do other organizations that you've heard of, is it just that?
Burn down charts, make somebody happy.
Huh? So we got burn down charts? What?
Stand-ups and sprints.
We're doing stand-ups. We do daily stand-ups, so we're doing Scrum, right? What of my favorite is we're using Jira, so we must be agile, right? We got everything in Jira, and then we hear a lot of what we call Scrum but, right? It's like we do Scrum, but we don't do retrospectives anymore because we didn't find that those were working for us. Now, when we focus on, again, the framework itself of Scrum, and what happens is when organizations, they're mostly mimicking, right? It's like, all right, I've seen other companies, or I've heard of other people, or I read a book, or I saw a video, or I read a blog, and Scrum is documented in like an 18-page. The Scrum Guide is only 18 pages, so you can read that one sitting, and you can read all the words and say, I understand all the words, and then you can mimic it in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, you can check all the boxes and say, you know what, we're doing Scrum. Like we had a stand-up, we called you a Scrum Master, we called you a product owner, we put our stuff in Jira, and we could say, all right, we're doing Scrum. So for the novice, they think they're done, right? Because they've never seen it better than that. And it's hard to really assess yourselves. But if we think about it from a capabilities perspective, and if we define the capability as our team is continuously improving, right? As opposed to saying our team is doing retrospectives. Because we could check the box if we're doing a retrospective by we had a meeting, everybody showed up, we bitched about everything, and we left, right? That's what most retrospectives turn into, just a gripe session. So what if we said our capability is that we're retrospecting, and the way that we're measuring that is that our team is demonstrating continuous learnings and continuous improvements in their performance, however you want to measure that, is getting better. Well, that would be a different thing and different goal to give our team than say, y'all shall go do Scrum, right? And that's what we're really talking about here, is saying, all right, if we said that we want a continuous improvement as a goal, then what's the capability that we're trying to get at a team level? And then the practice, yes, a retrospective should help us get there. That's just one element of trying to get to that. So what I want you to do, for those that have the cards in front of you, if you turn over one of the cards that you had, and I've got speed turned over here, so if you want to play along with the speed card, what you're looking at is this kind of map that we have put together around Agile. What we see is the 30 top kind of Agile outcomes, the things that agility promises, not from a business perspective, but from a, if we're better, that means we have, faster time to value, or we have the ability to forecast, or we have multi-team predictability. And we've got these kind of organized, the three levels that we're going to talk about today are kind of from a team level focus here. Then we've got the system level focus, which is the kind of network of teams, if you will, the flow of value delivery that cross teams, that we need all the teams to kind of deliver, is what we call the system level. And then the organizational level is kind of from a leadership perspective, organizational structure, organizational practices like HR people practices, finance practices, like that project funding type of stuff. How is the organization responding? And so if you think about mapping in our different frameworks that are out there, Scrum and Kanban would play very much at the team level. SAFe and the scaling frameworks play very much at the system level and answer some of the practices that we would need to implement to achieve these outcomes. And there's not a lot of answers that are out there organizationally, but it is what the Agile community likes to complain about a lot. So if you look at any of the state of Agile surveys that come out every year, the number like 1, 2, and 3 things are all about how the executives aren't doing this, and how our leadership isn't supporting that, and how we're not getting enough training because, all these kinds of things, which is pointing at an organizational challenge. And the good news is, as we kind of entered 2019, Eric and I sat down and we kind of thought about what trends are we seeing coming into the year. And one of the good things that we saw coming into the year is that more and more organizations are recognizing finally that there's more than a team level problem, right? I would say most of the Agile transformations that happened in the prior decade were really just team level only transformations. They're only focused on the team level practices, and they are mostly Scrum oriented. Now in the last probably about 5 years, we've seen all these scaling frameworks emerging that are helping us, and kind of pushing more into the system level, and how do we manage at a large size of thousands of folks coordinating work. But there's still a starting to be a recognition of, from a leadership perspective, that the leaders are part of this too. But I would say as a community, we've done a terrible job of supporting our leaders. Like if you think about all the things we've done as an Agile community, is we've told all the leaders the things they can't do. We've said, all right, you can't come to the meetings, you're the retrospective, you can't taskmaster and tell people what to do anymore. That's the product owner. You need to empower the team and get out of their way, and you can't manage them in the way that you did. So we've done all these things to tell the leaders, like, you can't do all the things you used to do, but we haven't done a good job of saying, okay, what's the leader's role now? So what do I do? And I think that's what we're looking at from an organizational standpoint, and thinking about how do leaders actually empower the teams? And there's two sides to that coin. Teams are being empowered, teams are taking ownership. Are leaders shifting in what we call kind of more leadership agility, being more catalyst leaders as opposed to the expert leader that knows how to do everything and is telling everybody what to do because they're the best at what they do and that's why they are promoted, versus a catalyst leader that's trying to create the vision and get everybody kind of working in the same direction. Decision agility. Are we moving more of our decisions down to the team that's closest to where the problems are, as opposed to it going up the hierarchy and down the hierarchy, which is just too slow, right? It's just too slow for the rate of change that we have for us to make decisions in the old school kind of way. So all of these things become kind of those agile outcomes. And what I want you to do is think about these, what do we got here? 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 agile outcomes that we've identified would move the needle the most on speed. So if speed was your #1 goal, then these are kind of the 8 things that we think from an agile outcomes, if you focused on, would do that. And you've got some blue cards on your table. So what I want you to do is work together in your pairs and kind of order. Think about ordering these. Which would be the ones that you would focus on first? Which ones would be the things you would focus on last, in order to kind of achieve from a goal of speed? If your goal was speed, your business outcome was speed, how would you kind of stack rank these 8 things? So give that a shot, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, so looks like decision agility, and one thing to look at here. So decision agility and ability to focus were both organizational level. So you guys, just like everybody, have blamed leadership. Right, but right, yeah, it may be right that are we making decisions quickly? That may be the reason why, some of us, it's like, all right, we focus speed. If we're focusing only on the team level, then speed is focused mostly a lot of times on what can we get done in a 2-week sprint. And I see a whole lot of organizations trying to optimize that 2-week sprint. However, if you look at that feature, it went through like 6 months of stage gate approval process, something or others, before it even got to the team. So is the 2 weeks really where we should be optimizing? Right? The 2 weeks wasn't actually the bottleneck. It was all of this decision making that was happening up here, going up, getting approval, getting funded, all this kind of stuff that happens, as opposed to, and it could have been an idea that the team identified and was a really good idea, but it had to go through all of this kind of stuff. And then there's also the speed of, all right, we optimized the 2 weeks. How long does it take for us to actually get it into production? I was working with one client where they were doing 3-month kind of release cycles, and 2-week sprints within the 3 months. But it took over a year to get things funded before it even got into that 3-month cycle. And even after they finished, the deployment took, because they had like 30,000 devices they were rolling out to, the deployment took 12 weeks in itself. And the reason why they weren't releasing more often is because they were just finishing deploying by the time, they couldn't shorten the release cycle to less than 3 months because it took 3 months to roll anything out. And what do you think they were optimizing? Everybody was focused on the 2-week sprint. And I was like, the thing you need to be optimizing is your 12-week release, so like this release continuously that's down here. Are we able to release faster with quality? Can we release with speed? And why is it taking so long up front? Which gets to like the decision agility here. We had some changes. So faster time to value has jumped up to #1 while I was talking there, and even reduced. So these two, right, are related. One is at the system level, one is at the team level. So one is, can a team reduce their cycle time? Are they limiting WIP? Are they swarming, right? We don't want to see like what I would call a mini waterfall within a 2-week sprint, where we're doing dev, and QA in the last 2 days, which means we're probably going to carry stuff over. So the team's swarming, getting stuff done every couple days. But faster time to value is really about, are we packaging, all the things up that all the teams are doing and getting them out the door, right? So what is the speed to kind of market in that way? Any other observations that anybody in here, or anything that kind of rattled as you guys were doing this exercise that you wanted to kind of highlight? Anything that jumped out?
I thought for our team, we got our top 1, 2, or 3 really quickly.
Yeah.
But as we got further down, there was a lot more discussion.
Yeah, and this is an interesting thing also. So the point was, it was pretty like getting the top ones, and maybe even like I saw you guys like eliminating. You were kind of eliminating. So it's like we could the ends of the spectrums. And the reality is, it's probably not as important to stack rank 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 as much as knowing, okay, here's the 3 that we need to go focus on. Now, the other thing that's important to look at in the map is, there is some dependency across these different things. So if we said we want reduced cycle time, but we can't even deliver predictably at a team level, right? So even though that's maybe the one we want and we say is the most important, that may not be the thing we need to focus on. This may be the thing that we need to prioritize. And it could be that we're never going to get there because our teams haven't even taken ownership of their process. They don't believe in retrospectives. They don't even have a scrum master, right? So it could even be all the way back to a team formed issue. It could be that we don't even have the right teams formed, right? So we sometimes will look at and say, all right, here's a lens of those are, if we can achieve those agile outcomes, if we could turn all those to green, then we probably have a really good chance that speed has gotten better. However, we might, in order to turn those green, we might need to work on more of the things that are to the left, right? Because there's definitely dependencies that way, and there's dependencies up and down that we need to look at. But figuring out so what we're trying to use this model and way of thinking is to try and figure out, where do we focus? Because a lot of times as Agilists, we go and well, I want all those things. And when I put the yellow cards down in front of leaders, what do you think they want? All the things. Right? So now, right? Yeah. So what we've got to think about is, how are we creating focus and intent about what we're trying to do? Is there method to our madness, or are we just left with trying to do smart stuff? And a lot of times as leaders, what we're doing is we're in an organization and or leaders, change agents, we're in there and we're doing what we think is the right next smart thing. But if we can't tie it into a context and something that people want, then we're going to have a hard time convincing everybody else, right? So if we say we need to focus on decision agility because we have said that speed is an imperative, and if we've articulated why, and everybody understands why the company is trying to deliver faster, why is it important for your company to be able to deliver things faster and learn from them? And if we could articulate that in a way where we say, well, because our competitors are, right, because we're getting left behind, because if there's something that we've created where we're compelling people into action of wanting to change, that's what this allows us. This creates a North Star for us to focus on, as opposed to if we just focus on that practices level and we just go to somebody and say, hey, you're not doing Scrum right. Is that motivating? Right? You need to do better retrospectives. Is that going to change anybody's mind? Why do we need to do better retrospectives? Because Scrum says so, right? When we start with the practices aren't motivating to anybody. They may be motivating to the believers, probably the folks that are in the room and on the line, right? Like, we believe that Agile is the right way, but if we just go in with that kind of that's not going to sell anybody. But a business outcome is something we can sell people on. And then what we've got to do, our job is to tie the practices that would allow us to, say, get to faster cycle time, tie those practices back to this North Star that would be motivating for folks on why we need to change, right? What's in it for them, right? We got to focus on those elements. All right, so we're going to let the live stream folks go. Thank you for joining today.